I want to thank everyone for coming. This is really a special day. It's exciting, the things that have been happening in New Jersey, and they're extremely positive, and I can't tell you how excited I am to be the executive director of Courage to Connect New Jersey. But the people that are involved in it is what makes this organization, and a lot of it is elected officials around the state and citizens that are here today. And we expect to have a lot of Q&A today, because today is about learning from what's happened in New Jersey and getting your questions answered, and Courage to Connect New Jersey is your resource for consolidation. I'm really excited. We have the 3rd edition guidebook. In 1 year, we're on our 3rd edition guidebook. I got it yesterday at 5 p.m., so it's hot off the press. And I'm really glad that we made it. About 2 years ago, I met this young man, Andrew Bruck, who I'm going to introduce. He was at Stanford Law School, and while he was at Stanford Law School, he had this wild idea to write this paper called Overruled by Home Rule with our other board member, Joe Pinto, back there. And 2 years ago, I read it, and I was overwhelmed by it. And he has been working tirelessly for the state of New Jersey and for Courage to Connect New Jersey for 2 years. And I'd like to introduce Andrew Bruck to go over our guidelines. One of the reasons why I founded Courage to Connect New Jersey is because of the 2007 law that was passed. And it gave the people the same power and rights as local elected officials. And what we've done is we've gone through the steps and made a guidebook, and here's Andrew Bruck to go through the 6 steps to consolidation. Thank you, Andrew.
Morning. Can you guys hear me? I haven't used one of these things before. So, as Gina mentioned, in 2007, the state legislature overhauled New Jersey's municipal consolidation laws. And in a literal sense, they democratized the process. They made it easier, they made it more accessible, they increased the options for public participation. It became possible for citizens to petition to initiate the process. But in another sense, the process became less democratic because they passed this law, changing the way consolidation worked. But the state didn't do anything to communicate this new law to the people, so that even though these new options were on the book, there was no way for anyone to actually take advantage of it. I don't know if you guys have ever tried reading a statute before, but it's not a model of clarity. And at Courage to Connect, we realized that there was this tremendous opportunity for citizens and for local officials to engage in this process if they knew the information that was out there. And so we took it upon ourselves to do what ideally the state would have done in the first place, which is communicate those opportunities to the people. To provide a little bit of context, New Jersey is probably in the middle of a 150-year pendulum swing in the ease of joining towns together. About 150 years ago, in the mid-1800s, it was very easy for towns to split apart, but it was really difficult for towns to come back together. And so what was going on in the middle of the 19th century was that anytime you had a group of citizens in a community who didn't like what their local government was doing, they split off and formed a new town. And the state legislature, because of issues with the way that the state was being operated at the time, made that very easy. And so the state is filled with these great stories about a group of citizens who didn't like the plans for a central sewer system in their town, so they formed their own municipality. They didn't like the way that schools were being funded, so they went off and formed their own town. And New Jersey essentially went from, I think it's about 190 towns to 500 plus towns over the course of a century. And at the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century, the state legislature starts to get wise to this. They realize the costs and the dangers of making it so easy for towns to split up, and they put an end to it, but they don't really take a step to make it easier for towns to come back together. They pass a law in the 50s, they pass a law in the 70s, and New Jersey had not, up until 1998, New Jersey had only consolidated one town over the past half century. In the mid-90s, you have two towns merge, although one of the towns that engaged in that merger only had 4 residents left in it, so I'm not sure it really counts. And then there was this huge breakthrough, I guess about 6 months ago, when the two Princetons decided to come back together as a single town. And I think they deserve a round of applause. So what I'd like to do now is quickly go through the 2007 law and try to explain to you how this process works, and then just try to answer whatever questions you guys have. We thought that understanding this process will make it easier to understand the two panels that are coming up next. So the law itself doesn't actually describe the procedure for towns to consolidate, or they don't describe it in a particularly neat and easy way. So instead what we did was we created a guidebook that goes through that process. And for simplicity's sake, we split it up into 6 steps so that it was straightforward and easy to understand. It's up here on the poster. It also appears on page 10 of the guidebook, which you should have in front of you. And so let's start with the first one. The first step, if you want to undertake a consolidation, is simply to organize, to simply know what's going on, to understand what this process looks like. In theory, the Department of Community Affairs for the state of New Jersey should be helping you understand how a consolidation works. We found that the state is filled with a lot of great people who are swamped and don't always have the time to hold people's hand through what is often a difficult and confusing process. When you want to undertake a consolidation, the first thing you want to do is reach out to the state and let them know of your interests, and then to also reach out to Courage to Connect, who can sort of take you through this process as well. And then you actually get into the legal substance of a consolidation. Generally speaking, in sort of the broadest terms, the way a consolidation works is that first you pull together a group of experts to figure out whether or not the consolidation makes sense. And then if that group of experts says, yes, thumbs up to consolidation, then there's some sort of approval process in each of the towns to decide whether or not they're going to merge. So steps 2 through 4 are really about creating that expert panel. And what you're doing is, in order to create that expert panel, you got to get approval both from your local towns and you've got to get approval from the state. So the second step is actually creating the application that you're going to submit in order to jumpstart this process. What we've done is actually included a copy of that application, which begins at page 19. It's 6 pages long, it's fairly straightforward, and it just lays out the fact that you want to consolidate municipalities, and you provide some of the details about how that actually is going to take place. Yeah, sure.
Excuse me, isn't this out of order? Aren't the local public meetings supposed to be before the application is made?
So what we've been told by the Department of Community Affairs is that they want to see a copy of the application before they help you organize those public hearings. We had originally thought that the best way to do it would be to hold the public hearings first, and the DCA has said that they want to sign off on the process before.
The statute says that it's supposed to be held before.
So the statute just says that the hearings need to take place before the local finance board signs off on the process. And so what has happened is that there's an informal review process that takes place at the DCA that wasn't incorporated in the original statute.
You're saying the municipality should vote on the resolution prior to holding the public hearing?
That is how the DCA would like to see it happen.
That's exactly what destroyed Sussex wanted.
What's that?
That's exactly what destroyed the process in Sussex wanted.
Fair enough. So the first thing you do is you fill out the application. Courage to Connect is happy to sit down with you and sort of take you through that process if you have questions. Then what you do is you go forward and you get approval from your local communities, and then you get approval from the state. There are two different ways that you can get local approval. The first is through a petition process, getting signatures from people who live in all the towns. And the second is through a resolution process, where you have the local governing councils pass resolutions authorizing the creation of the study commission. There is an interesting quirk in the way that the petition provision is written that says that you need to get 10%, you need to get signatures equal to 10% of the number of citizens who voted in the last General Assembly election. And General Assembly elections take place every other year in New Jersey on odd-numbered years. So right now, the most recent General Assembly election was in 2011. And the reason why that's an interesting quirk is because we tend to have very low turnout in New Jersey in off-year elections. And so because the governor wasn't up for re-election and because we had no federal elections going on, turnout was really suppressed. And so in order to get, now the base number that you're using, of which you need 10% signatures, is very low. So for towns that are interested in launching a consolidation process, the barriers to entry are much lower than they would have been 6 months ago prior to the 2011 election. And we have a 2-year window until the 2013 election when Christie is up for re-election, where it's easier to start this process than it's been in the past. To get a sense of what it requires, you can take a look at page 68, where we actually go through every town in New Jersey, figure out the turnout at the 2011 election, and then provide 10% of that, so you can see how many votes you need. And it's, in some towns, it's a very, very small number. One other thing to note when you're getting this local approval in your towns is that some towns are allowed to get approval through the petition process, and some towns are allowed to get approval through the resolution process. You can mix and match. That's something that wasn't formally permitted by the state as of a year ago, and Courage to Connect worked with Senator Gordon and several other people in the state legislature to change that and make it easier. And Governor Christie signed that into law last April. So once you've gotten local approval, either through petitions or through resolutions, you then have to go to the state to get them to sign off on the application as well. And the entity that actually makes that decision is a panel that exists within the Department of Community Affairs called the Local Finance Board. And the Local Finance Board reviews your application and votes on it. Now, the way that it should work is, the way that the statute lays it out is that you just submit your application to the Local Finance Board and they vote on it and you're good to go. In reality, the Local Finance Board wants to see the application months ahead of time so that they can get a sense of what it is that you're doing, make sure that you're dotting all the I's and crossing all the T's. So in reality, though you don't need to get approval from the state until step 4, usually you will be talking to the state as early as step 2 so they know where you are. And so that you don't go through the local approval process of going out and getting petitions or going out and having resolutions passed until you've gotten essentially the go-ahead from the state that this process is going to work and that you're doing everything properly. Go before the Local Finance Board. The panel meets. If the Department of Community Affairs has signed off on the application at some point along the way, told you preliminarily we think this is going to go through, then this should be a pro forma process. Once they've voted, you then have a set amount of time to actually create a study commission. You have typically 5 residents from each of the towns that are interested in studying the consolidation. They form a commission, and then they begin the process of studying whether or not to consolidate. because the members of the commission are local residents and might not always be experts in local land use law, local finance law, they typically hire an outside consultant in order to assist in the study process. And so you'll have to identify a fiscal agent, you have to identify, you have to create an RFP, issue an RFP, take bids on who the consultant is going to be, and Courage to Connect can assist you in that process, as can the Department of Community Affairs, which has a lot of experience doing this in other contexts. The study commission spends between 9 months to, in theory, 3 years doing the study and figuring out whether the consolidation makes sense. And one of the panels today involves some of the members of the study commission in the Princeton, so you can get a sense of what that actually looks like and the kinds of issues that they discuss. At the end of the study commission process, the commission publishes a report, and at the end of that report, they indicate whether they're going to recommend consolidation between the towns. In the report, they also will include some information about what the new town will look like, what its name will be, what the system of government will be, what you're going to do about debts and existing bonds, and the consolidation of local buildings and assets in the community. One of the most important things that will be in that report as well is an analysis of the change in the tax burden in the communities. They will include some sort of indication as to whether they expect local property taxes to go down in one or both of the communities. And from a political perspective, that's one of the most powerful tools you'll have when trying to convince local residents that a consolidation makes sense. If you can actually show an official report that says this town is expected to save $3 million a year in perpetuity, and every individual homeowner in the town is going to save $500 on the property taxes, it creates a powerful economic incentive that helps to overcome, I think, some of the fears that people have about losing the sense of identity that they perceive through a consolidation. And then the final step, assuming that you've gotten the recommendation to consolidate, is an actual approval of the consolidation. And again, this can happen in one of two ways. Either the governing boards of the two communities, or the multiple communities, can vote on whether to consolidate, or there can be a referenda in the towns where the voters actually weigh in. In theory, you can also set up a process where both of those things have to happen in order for the consolidation to go forward. You will lay out which option you want as part of the application in step 2. You get to decide when you're crafting the application which option is best. And so this is essentially the legal steps that you have to take in order to do a consolidation. There's obviously a lot more to this process than statutory interpretation and sort of rule following. It can be a political process, a emotional process, a financial process, and that's something that the panels will be discussing today based on their experiences going through some of the consolidations over the last 2 years. So having done this overview, I think it would be helpful to take questions and see if there's anything you guys don't understand, there's issues that you anticipate, issues that you've come up with in your own communities doing a consolidation. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, the issue of funding the consultant that would help with the study.
Yeah.
Suggestions for that, where would that come? Is there any money available from the state, or does that all have to be done locally? And roughly, I'm sure there's a huge variety, but roughly what's those costs run? What are your, for instance?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, as a general matter, we found that funding for the commission is probably one of the biggest roadblocks, one of the biggest challenges in putting together this process. On average, a consultant will cost, I think, between about $50,000 and $100,000. How much was it for Princeton?
$76,000.
$76,000. And there's a range in the quality of expert consultants.
She said it was, sorry.
$76,000. And the
And-
state paid $37,500.
Yeah, and the one that the Princetons did was really, really good. I mean, it was really professionally done. And I think that had a large impact on their ability to sell the consolidation to the voters. In theory, the state should be paying for consolidation studies. There's a lot of things that the state, in theory, should be paying for in New Jersey. And unsurprisingly, this has been one of the things for which funding has been largely cut. Part of the reason is because there have been studies in the past, the state has fronted the money and then the consolidation has gone nowhere. And then they say, why did we spend $75,000 on a study to have the towns vote down consolidation? Our guess is that in the future, if the towns can show that there is a high likelihood of a consolidation being successful, the state will be more likely to provide some of the funding, although probably not all of it.
We actually have the state here now,
Right.
so why don't we put the heat on him?
Yeah, exactly, right, yeah. In addition, we're also working with some of the members of the state legislature to come up with new ways to structure the financing. So one idea that we have is to amortize the expenses over 5 years, so at least the town only has to pay 1/5 of it at the beginning, and then you can pay the rest off the cost savings from the consolidation. Another idea that we have is to try to have the state create templates for the study commission, so that you don't need an expert to come in and do all of the work for you. Some of it can be done by lay people who don't have experience in municipal finance. So we're working on a couple different solutions.
Or
If it doesn't,
or have a fund,
Yeah.
a fund that the first to go get the money.
Yeah.
Maybe, well, we have the state here, he can answer that
Yeah.
question. And that's what's so incredible about this issue and restructuring New Jersey is the state, the governor, legislators, local government, and the citizens all have to work together. If we're going to accomplish this, we all have to work together. And that's such a unifying issue for New Jersey. And right now we have the director of the Division of Local Government Services, DLGS, and that's the division within the DCA, the Department of Community Affairs, that consolidation goes through. He is also the director of the Local Finance Board. And before I introduce Director Neff, Commissioner Constable was supposed to be here today, and he had to be with the governor. And so in his stead, he has asked Director Neff to come and speak to you. So I would like to introduce the director.
Good morning. I only plugged in the address in my GPS, and I didn't know that it was at the hotel, and I saw the Hooters, and I thought you were going to be the Hooters. I mean, that's a classy Gina thing. First off, let me just apologize on behalf of the commissioner. I know he really wanted to be here himself. And he had told Gina that he would come, and unfortunately he doesn't control his own schedule sometimes. The legislature has their opening budget hearing next Monday, and the commissioner is first up on plate for Tuesday, I think. But he's back in Trenton, and he's preparing for that. When I leave here, I have to go back and help him prepare. But I want to thank Gina for putting this together. As she knows, I've talked to her many times, and our division has 40 staff members. We used to have 120. So there's lots of things we'd love to be able to do like everybody else, but we just can't. So it's really important that groups like this sort of step up to the plate and put meetings, seminars together to help educate people about what they can do to bring efficiencies to their local governments. And a lot of credit goes to Gina for this sort of stuff, because if it wasn't for her doing this, it wouldn't get done as much as it gets done. Other places like the League of Municipalities and Conference of Mayors schedule things like this too, but it's not always with the same level of enthusiasm or focus that Gina brings to the issue. So briefly, let me just say a couple things about what the state can do to be somewhat helpful in the efforts that all of you are engaged in. First, I think the most important is information. All of you need to know what it is that your neighbors are delivering by way of services and how they deliver them, so that you can better understand when and where it makes sense to either merge or share services. And I see we have a freeholder here today who's been working with our division to try and do a better job of standardizing the sort of data that's out there. We all see the municipal budgets. They're finally online, something that was long overdue, which has happened in the last couple of months or a year, where you can actually get budgets online. But those budgets are this thick. Sometimes they're not the most user-friendly documents in the world. They're really designed for the accountants and the professionals who run the municipalities. And one of the things that the division is in the process of doing now is finalizing a draft of a standard user-friendly budget, just a 2-page document, Excel spreadsheet that shows town by town, department by department, how many employees it has delivering, say, public works or your fire services or your police services. And that way you'll be able to go and look at your neighbor's performance indicators about how much does it cost for them to deliver the same services that your town delivers. You'll be able to see a little bit about what sort of overhead is there in these departments and where can mergers or consolidations maybe make sense. But without that sort of information that's in a user-friendly format for all of you, it's hard for you to articulate the savings that we all know are there. So in the next month or so, we should be finalizing our draft. We're going to put it up on our website. Very easy to find our website if you just Google DLGS. And it'll be up on the website for people to comment on. Before we actually adopt it as a formal rule, we want to make the process as inclusive as possible so people can tell us, what would you like to see by way of standardized, user-friendly budget information so you know what your neighbors are doing and how you can best present your arguments for when it makes sense to share services or merge. So I encourage all of you in the coming month, be on the lookout for that data. If there's data that you think we should be including as part of that user-friendly data and we're not, let us know. We're easy to reach, we're easy to contact, and we encourage that. I really do believe that information is the best source of the best track for all of you to be able to articulate the things in your local areas that are important to you. And without it, the efforts will fail. So it's extraordinarily important. Again, I really encourage people to participate with that. As Gina knows, and as all of you know, the state no longer has the resources it used to have. The state used to fund shared service studies, used to fund consolidation commissions. The money's frankly not there anymore for those types of things. The division does still play a role in assisting with shared services and mergers. We're always available to meet with municipalities when they want to meet with us to talk about whether it's sharing police services or actually merging with a neighboring town. We do have a generalist on our staff who's been there for 39 years. His name is John Raz. He's available to answer questions that people may have that are unique to their municipalities. We have a police officer, former police sheriff on our staff who is willing to work with anybody in any municipality to talk about generally what are the approaches for sharing police services with a neighboring town. He's been very instrumental in working with Camden County to try and set up a regional police force and working with individual municipalities like Penns Grove and Carneys Point who are trying to share their police services. We have a fire expert named Don Huber who's more than willing to sit down with towns that have multiple fire districts to talk to them about how they can share their services or consolidate their fire districts. He does that in Hamilton. He's been working with municipalities up in Hudson and Essex counties to try and get them to share their fire services. And finally, on the back end, if a municipality decides that it wants to merge through one of the 3 different laws that allow for mergers, we do provide staff on the consolidation study commissions and otherwise engaged in those municipalities to help them to some extent. Like I said, we can't be throwing money at every problem. That's not always the answer, and it's usually a very heavy lift at the local level. You all know that. And the work has to be done somewhere. So the consolidation study commissions are important. We will help staff them, but we won't be paying for the studies that happen like the state once used to do, but we will be there as a resource. Unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to stay here very long and answer a lot of questions. I would take a question or two if people want to.
Yes, George. Can you just say your name and where you're from, please?
Yes, George Brown, the Chairman of the Board of Fire Commissioners, Gloucester Township Fire District 6. has there been any regional fire districts created, meaning across 2 municipalities?
Not that I'm aware of, and in fact, that would be a big lift. I know there are lots of agreements between fire districts or municipalities to share services when there's overflow needs. They do that all the time, but in terms of a formal regionalization of fire services, no. And there's an active effort in Monmouth County to do that. Asbury Park has been promoting for the last year or so under a very active manager there to regionalize fire services. And there have been a lot of discussions about it where it may or may not make sense. But it is probably the way of the future at some point, because there's fewer and fewer volunteer fire departments out there, and people were able to spend the kind of time doing that. And there's a need for a little bit better efficiencies of scale. I think everybody's heard the stories about Bergen County having more fire apparatus than all of New York City. And those sorts of discussions need to happen, and they are happening. But the short answer to your question is not that I'm aware of.
Are there any legal barriers to doing that?
No, there's a legal process for consolidating fire districts and for municipalities to share their services, which would effectively allow for a single regional entity. It's a rather specialized area, and like I said, we have a fire expert on our staff. Don Huber was a fire chief, I think, in Irvington many years ago. He's a great resource, and if people have questions, whether it's on fire services or specifically on police, I encourage you to reach out to them. They're there, they're available to talk to anybody who has questions or concerns.
Just for whatever it's worth, the fire districts are the stepchildren of government because we're governed by 40A, and we're just so far behind the curve in terms of what needs to be done. Just saying.
My name is Fred Lang. I'm with Courage to Reconnect. We're trying to combine Fanwood and Scotch Plains. As a citizens action group, we are in the process of applying an application to the local finance board to get permission to have a study. But it sounds like there's no point in it any longer if we can't get funding. Do you have any comments about that?
I think that's a point that may or may not be valid. You know it better at your own local level than I would. Not every effort to merge needs to pay a vendor to come in and prepare information that is able to be gathered and put together at the local level by people who are good volunteers and who are willing to work hard. I know it's tough. I know it's difficult, but in every community, you'll find a former municipal employee who may understand the community and its internal operations better than some outside vendor might. And you probably have a wealth of people who'd be willing to volunteer their abilities, whether they be former lawyers or current lawyers, or people who understand water systems or what have you. And it's hard to do that work. And I would encourage all of you to take an approach to the hard work of figuring out what it takes to merge, of trying to do it yourselves. Don't always try and rely on a vendor. There are going to be people who come to you and say, oh, if you just pay us $50,000, we'll do a study and all will be well. But, anybody can do a study. At the hard work that goes into it, if it comes from the grassroots and it comes from people who are working on these commissions themselves, it'll probably be a little bit better work product, I would argue, at the end of the day. And it can be done. The information is there. And I would encourage everybody to that end of being able to do these studies yourselves, work with the municipalities that you're engaged in. If you can get their cooperation or at least their willingness to share information with you, as opposed to being in a hostile relationship with them. I know that's not always possible, but that always works better, because if you can build consensus, at the end of the day, there's going to need to be a consensus to actually merge. So, work on that and strive to get that done. So I would just encourage folks to, rather than rely on vendors whose work product sometimes is better than others,
Yes.
Gretchen Schmidt-Hausler, Lake Como, New Jersey. So it makes sense to know what your costs would be going into it even before, because if you're asking residents to sign a petition to approve a study, or to create a study commission, one of their questions is going to be, what's this gonna cost us? So you would want to make sure that your funding was in place, or that at least you had an idea before you even began the process?
Well, it would depend. It depends on who's available to help with the study. It may be able to be done free of charge. If the municipalities themselves are willing to cooperate in the study, their own staff may be able to be lent to the process and provide information and put data together. I live in Lake Como too, so I understand the challenges that sometimes are run up against. But every municipality is going to be a little bit different. There may be a municipality where the people who want to have a merger don't have the sophistication or the resources or the volunteers who can do the study themselves, or maybe they do. I know that if I weren't in the position that I'm in now, I'd be more than happy to take a role in my own community to do those things. I can't by virtue of what I do at this point. But I'm sure there are good people in Lake Como and Belmar who'd be willing to help, whether they be former mayors of one community or the other, or former employees of those municipalities. Would be more than happy to help. Or people who have something to bring to the table, whether it be a law degree or somebody who can really navigate the legal ins and outs of what it takes to merge. But it's hard to say up front for every municipality that you have to come up with a budget. You may not need one. You don't have to have a formal paid study.
I'd like to take exception to the point that you made about consultants or outside contractors helping with the consolidation effort. Princeton's consolidated on the 4th try. One of the major differences between the previous 3 tries and the 4th try was that the previous 3 tries were done with volunteers, strictly with volunteers. They included former elected officials, they included prominent people in the municipality, and there was no dearth of talent. One of the major differences between the 3 failed efforts and the successful effort was the assistance that we received from an outstanding contractor who aided in the study. The bulk of the work was still done by the people on the commission, but the contractor played a very important role in setting the framework, helping us as a project manager, and ensuring that we had transparency in the effort. And I think that it is a failing on the part of the state to back away from a role in helping to fund the consolidation studies. I think that,
Can you please say who you are?
yes, I'm Bernie Miller. I'm a Princeton Township Committee man, former mayor, former deputy mayor, member of the Consolidation Study Commission, and member of the transition team that's working to merge the 2 municipalities.
Okay. And let me just let me just say, that's not to say that a town can't move forward with its own vendor. I know that in the case of the 2 Princetons, of the 2 Princeton governing bodies were very cooperative, supportive of the effort. And who's to say whether the state funding was available for that study, that it wouldn't have been funded by the 2 Princetons? I don't know the answer to that. Maybe the 2 Princetons would not have funded it themselves. But the state isn't the only source of funding for these types of studies. The local governments can contribute towards them too if they're serious about the efforts, as can people can contribute to these things to themselves as well. But your point's taken. It's always better to have more funding for these types of things than less. But in the times we're in, unfortunately, that's an appropriation that's not available. So I'm going to have to get back, and I don't want to draw away from the rest of your seminar. I know Gina's got an active day for everybody and a lot of things on the table. So
Thank
I'll
you.
stop hogging the mic and give it back to Gina.
Thank you, Director.
I'm going back home.
I appreciate it. Thank you. That's why we're here today. Because we've been talking about this issue since 1895. I have a New York Times article back there in the corner talking about consolidation in New Jersey since 1895. There's also an article from 1934 where the then governor, Governor Moore, he was so frustrated with the legislature and he said, you know, we have to consolidate. We have too many local governments. And in that article he says, only a group of citizens can change that. This is 1934. And in 2011, a group of citizens did change that.